Welcome back to News Talk alongside Washington Post senior regional correspondent Bob McCartney. I'm Bruce DePoy. Thanks very much for being with us today. Let's bring in Jim Diniger. He's head of the Greater Washington Board of Trade. Jim, your sense for when this region, and thank you for your patience, what's your sense of when we're going to be ready to get employers, to get folks back to work? I know there's a need, there's an imperative to have people back on the job, but we struggle on a good day with mobility, and we're well short of normal. What's your sense of when we can do it? What's the appropriate time to get to the federal government and other employers back open?
Today. I'm talking to you from my office now. It's not a case that everything should be open and could be open, but we've spent a lot of money in technology for people to be able to work back from home. For the federal government to decide last night at 10 o'clock that they were shutting down completely was a bitter disappointment, because too many companies follow the federal government, and yet still many companies are open today. If not on a modified schedule, either work from home if you can't get out of your neighborhood, there's always flexibility. I have to give a lot of credit to the D.C. government. The D.C. government is open for business, and not only are they open for business, but they've been out there tirelessly making the roads available. Metro has gotten ahead of things. So I'm going to say that tomorrow, if for some bizarre reason the federal government doesn't open again, when do we call them on this? I'll give them a 2-hour pass tomorrow, and let's let people into work, but I was really disappointed that they didn't do a 2-hour delayed leave today, giving people time to traverse the roads, giving people time to work their way in with a 2-hour extended leave. That would have been sufficient, but to shut it down at 10 o'clock last night, I just thought that was irresponsible.
I have to say I disagree with you quite a lot, and having been out walking, I guess, was what sealed the deal for me. That's what convinced me that we are nowhere ready to get the city back up and running again. It is really difficult to get around on foot, and it's dangerous. You've got so many roads that are supposed to be 2-lane roads that are essentially 1-lane roads now, meaning that every time a bus, if you're going to have bus service on a street like 16th Street, and every time every bus stops, that means that all traffic comes to a stop. The intersections, there are no crosswalks. It's dangerous and difficult for people who are on foot to get around.
And there are hundreds of thousands of people who come into the district every day, and I'm telling you, there are quite a few businesses that are in business, open today. And I'm not just talking about the sandwich shops. I'm talking about thriving businesses. The flexibility and the judgment that people can use in getting to work should be brought to bear. But a uniform across the board, shut it down for another day, when does it end? Are we going to give the federal government a pass if they shut down tomorrow again? A lot of business needs to get done. This is the beginning of the year. I'm with you on the safety. I'm certainly with you on the access. People have to use their best judgment. We're not asking people to get on slick roads out of their cul-de-sacs or not be able to walk to the bus stops.
Bob, what's your take on all this?
Well, I kind of agree that they should have shut down today, because I think if they'd opened, it just would have been overwhelmed. They would have overwhelmed the transportation network based on what I've seen. I think clearly they should have made the announcement earlier, as you and I discussed earlier in the show, but I do tend to think they ought to really try to open tomorrow. I mean, I think they have, the plows are getting to the subdivisions today, and 3 days in a row for one snowstorm I think would be an embarrassment as well as harmful to a lot of businesses. People can work from home, they can just take liberal leave, they can, exercise their own judgment, as Jim says. So I think 2 days is enough, personally.
Jim, did you think Metro's decision to shut everything down on Friday night and to announce then that there wouldn't be any service of any kind Saturday or Sunday, was that prudent or over-cautious?
Well, and they're going to get criticized all up and down the board on this, but I have to say what I liked about it was that it was decisive, it was clear, and it was early enough that people could factor in the plans. And we've been missing that over at Metro for a bit. A lot of credit to it. I thought they took an aggressive approach to putting many of the trains in tunnels. They didn't have to dig those out. I wish they could have done that for a lot of the buses, because that seems to have been quite a holdup on the buses. And then they turned around and in a very nice gesture made it available for no charge yesterday, got the system up and running. I know there's a challenge on the third rail on the Orange Line today, but by and large, the Metro rail system is up and running. The buses needed an enormous amount of work, And when a bus shuts down or gets stuck on the road, it blocks up a lot of the traffic.
You know, yeah, I really think that the district and the region need to find out why some of these other cities are able to do so much better. I mean, Philadelphia had 70% of their buses back running by mid-afternoon Monday. And Washington only has, Metro buses only has a quarter of its buses running today. So, and Wiedefeld, Paul Wiedefeld, the general manager of the new general manager of Metro, he said he wants to learn what some of these other cities are doing. He wants to sort of find out, do they have better equipment? Do they have more efficient bureaucracies? What is it about them that they're able to get the transportation running more quickly after a big snowstorm than we are?
Of course, they're at the mercy of the municipal governments in this region. They're the ones with the plows.
But fine, then, you know, D.C. and Montgomery County and Fairfax can learn from Philadelphia and the counties around Philadelphia, or the, you know, all the boroughs of New York. I mean, these other cities do better than we do when it comes to snow.
The buses that I know best, Jim, and, you know, we all tend to see events of this type through our own lens, our own day-to-day lived experience. But I will give you an example from my life. There are buses that come out of downtown and go through Adams Morgan to get to Mount Pleasant, the 42 and the 43. Thousands of people take them every day. There's a turnaround that is needed to get the buses heading back south after they've reached the northernmost point of their run. That not only has that turnaround not been touched by a plow since last week, the snow that got plowed up from Mount Pleasant Street has blocked the turnaround to make it even worse than it would be if it was just the snow that was there. So we can blame Metro all we want, but they can't go where they can't go, Jim. I mean, they're at the literal mercy of the states, of the district, and of anyone who's in charge of plowing any of our roads.
Yep, and I'm not looking to harp just on the federal government shutdown, though I do think that liberal leave is the right policy to have considered for today. Having said that, I'd like to focus just a minute more about what has gone right. This was a major snowstorm, one of the record breakers, top 5 measurements or not over at National Airport. And I have to give the region credit for an enormously strong and positive response in many different instances. Having said that, the forecasters were right. The snow plows have been working tirelessly and moving an enormous amount of snow. Not everything gets cleared, but not everything is closed. And so within that balance, I think that we could strike the balance a bit better. I do think that an after-action report, a very clear after-action report about what went right, what went wrong, what needs to be improved for next time, including that 1-inch ice storm the other night.
Great point.
All needs to be done, and the Council of Governments, I think, is the place to do it.
That's a great, Jim makes a great point. The region was brought to its knees by an inch of snow.
Yeah, well, that really shows the difference between having good preparation and being on top of it and not. I mean, we had more trouble with transportation with 1 inch of snow that wasn't handled correctly than we have had so far with 20 to 30 inches of snow. And I really give a shout out, by the way, to the electric utilities. They did really well. Before this thing, people were forecasting tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of outages, and I think it was in the hundreds. Now, they were lucky because the snow was lighter and not as wet and heavy, but the winds were high, and I think that some of the investments, especially that Pepco has made in the last few years in terms of tree trimming and in terms of hardening up some of these feeder stations and making them more resilient, I think that's paid off. And thank goodness, because we know that when power goes out, particularly at a rough time of year like this where it's so cold, once the power goes out, it can be out for quite a long time, and that's a huge hardship for people. Robert McCartney, Senior Regional Correspondent for the Washington Post, Jim Dininger, Head of the Greater Washington Board of Trade. Great having both of you here today. Thank you very much for your time. We'll step aside. We're back with more News Talk in a moment.